We'll start by sewing the body together. Start by threading our needle. First, wrap the yarn over the needle, then squeeze it between your fingers. Then, with the point between your fingers, you're going to thread that through the eye of the needle. Now we can start sewing it together. First, you're going to line up the ends of your Fiddle-Muff and locate the stitches on top. You're going to come through the near side of the muff and pull the yarn nice and tight. Then you're going to come from the near side all the way around to the far side in the next stitch and then back through the near side. Make sure you line up every stitch when you go along. Keep pulling the yarn tight to keep it together. Keep doing a looping motion coming from the far side through the middle to the near side and then back around again. I like to use this stitch, but you can use mattress stitch or whatever you want to keep it together. Continue this along till the end. When you get to the end, it should look something like this. And if it doesn't, that's okay, as long as it stays together. Now we're going to tie it off. Start by threading a needle through the stitch. Then pull the needle through until you have only a small loop left. You're going to put your needle through that loop and pull it nice and tight. This will create our first knot. We're going to do about 3. To do the next one, we're going to put our needle through another stitch and do the exact same thing by pulling it so that you have only a little loop left. Put your needle back through the loop and pull tightly. We'll repeat this one more time to give us a third knot. I like to do about 3 on all things that people are going to be fiddling and touching with often, just so that it doesn't come undone. Pull your third knot nice and tight, and then we'll be ready to move on to sewing in the ends. Sewing the ends, we're going to follow the stitches and go under the top part of the stitch and then through the middle. This will keep it nice and secure. We're going to do this for quite a few stitches to make sure that it won't come undone. Put your needle through the middle of the stitch, going underneath each and trying to follow along a line that'll keep the yarn secure and hidden. For things that people will be touching and fiddling with all the time, like Fiddle-Muffs and Goody Dolls and sensory toys, I like to sew in the ends nice and tight and secure so that none of it will ever come undone. I like to sew in quite a long tail, that way even if the muff is pulled a little bit, the yarn's not going to come out. I tend to do from 5 to 10 centimeters for items that people are going to be touching often. This will just give us peace of mind that it won't start to come out. I'll often loop back around to make sure that even if it's pulled a little bit from the beginning, it's not going to come undone around the circle. For other items like blankets and scarves, I won't sew in the ends this much, as people won't be touching it nearly as much. When you're happy with how much you've sewn in the ends, you're going to pull it a little bit loosely, and then you're going to cut the end of the yarn so you can't see it anymore. We're now going to move on to sewing things onto the Fiddle-Muff. We're going to start by sewing on a curlicue onto the inside of our muff. This is important as it gives the person something to play with when their hands are on the inside. Take the ends of your curlicue and weave them into the muff, just like we did with the end of the yarn that we were using when we sewed the muff together. If you've got 2 ends, you're going to weave the second one in till it's basically next to the other one. I would follow a similar route, but not the exact same one, making sure they don't come out of the same stitch. Now's the easy bit. What you're going to do is you're just going to tie a heap of knots. I do 5 here. These knots are going to bear the brunt of most of the fiddling, and so you want them to make sure that they will never come undone. Basically, the rule of thumb with making a fiddle muff is you want to look at the piece that you've put on and be able to say, well, if it's not with scissors, that ain't coming off. When you finish your knots, you're going to sew in the ends just like we did before. If possible, try to sew each end in a different direction. Once you've finished sewing your ends in, you're going to flip your fiddle muff in the right way so that the curlicue is on the inside now. You can always put more inside the fiddle muff, and I always like to have 1. If you've got a small square and not a medium square or a large square, you can use it as a finger fiddler. First, you're going to fold it in half. I like to have the tail end of the square on the near side, and then I will treat the fiddle muff as the far side. Pass your needle through the other side of the square and then through the far side. Loop back round to the near side, go through both sides of the square and then through the far side again. You're going to continue this along, just like we did when we sewed the fiddle muff together. Make sure on every pass through that you're getting both sides of the square and at least one ideally 2 stitches on the Fiddle-Muff. Continue this to the end and then tie it off the same way we did when we tied off the Fiddle-Muff. Then make sure the ends are weaved in very securely. You should end up with something like this. If your square is a little bit bigger than this, we can turn it into a pocket. Lay it down flat on your Fiddle-Muff so you know about where you'd like to sew it in. Then you're going to sew it onto the Fiddle-Muff the same way that we've sewn on everything else so far. Treat the Fiddle-Muff as the far side and the pocket as the near side. I tend to want to get 1 or 2 stitches on the Fiddle-Muff just to make sure it's not going to come off and put any pressure on any of the stitches. Along the bottom, to make sure the pocket is a little bit loose, I tend to do every 2nd or 3rd stitch into the same stitch on the Fiddle-Muff. This means that it's a little bit easier to put things in and out of the pocket when you'd like to. It should bunch up a little, and that's what we'd like. You'll progress through every stitch on the pocket as normal, but occasionally, instead of moving to the next stitch on the Fiddle-Muff, you'll go into the exact same stitch as you just had. When coming up on the other side, to keep it parallel with the other side, I like to use a safety pin to pin it just so that it doesn't move. If you're going to do this, make sure you only use a safety pin. Normal pins can be overlooked and can be extremely dangerous. Everyone makes mistakes sometimes, and so it's just easier to remove the hazard itself. Finish the pocket off the same way we did when we sewed the Fiddle-Muff together. For this pocket, I'm going to sew a worry worm curly Q into it. Other things you can use is a stuffed ball on a chain, or perhaps a fish or something entirely different. To sew the worry worm on, I'm going to thread one end of the yarn through one side of the stitches and then the other end through a separate stitch to the other side. Then I'm going to turn it inside out, and like we did with the first curly Q, we're going to tie a lot of knots in and then sew in the ends nice and securely. This way we can make sure the worm's not coming off even when the person who receives this is going to play with it lots. Now your pocket is done and your worm is attached, you can now put it in and out of the pocket whenever you like. We'll now move on to the crocheted ring. If your end is on the outside like mine, we're going to weave it into the inside. And once we're in the inside, we'll weave the yarn around the center ring. Lay the ring against your Fiddle-Muff. Then locate the stitches right next to the ring. You're going to thread the yarn through the stitch and then around the ring. You're going to then go back into the Fiddle-Muff and then through back to the front side of the Fiddle-Muff and then back around the ring. And you're going to keep doing this, wrapping the yarn around the ring, then through the Fiddle-Muff, back to the front and then around the ring again. I tend to do it only on one spot, that way the ring can move around freely. But it's up to you, and you can do it on more than one side. I do this about 4 or 5 times before I then thread the yarn to the inside of the Fiddle-Muff, where I would finish it off, and we'll do it the same way we did when we finished it off after sewing up the Fiddle-Muff. Do a lot of knots and weave in the ends nice and securely. It should end up looking something like this, but if it doesn't, I'm sure it's still great. You can see I've added a flower here. You can add whatever you want, be as creative as you'd like. Make sure everything's sewn on nice and tightly, and then you're done. Good job!